In a galaxy where strength determines hierarchy, and the mightiest races claim the front seats at the Galactic Council, humans have always been dismissed as weak, choosing to sit quietly in the back rows. The Draknari Empire, with their impenetrable scales and planet-crushing strength, had ruled unopposed for millennia. They laughed at the soft-skinned humans who spoke of strategy and patience instead of raw power. But when an ancient enemy awakens from the void between galaxies, something so terrifying that it once forced every species to unite or perish, the galaxy discovers why the most dangerous predators in nature never announce themselves with roars. They move silently, observe carefully, and strike when the moment is perfect. The Draknari are about to learn that in the vast theater of cosmic warfare, the back row isn't where the weak hide. It's where the apex predators watch, wait, and plan the hunt. The Galactic Council chamber stretched across 3 kilometers of polished obsidian, its vaulted ceiling disappearing into artificial stars that twinkled with the light of 1,000 conquered worlds. At the center of this magnificent arena stood the Draknari delegation, their 12-foot frames casting imposing shadows across the crystalline floor. Their scales, each one harder than reinforced titanium, caught the chamber's ambient light and reflected it back in brilliant displays of gold and crimson. Emperor Vorthak, supreme ruler of the Draknari Empire, raised his massive clawed hand to silence the assembly. His voice, when it came, rumbled through the chamber like distant thunder, amplified by bioacoustic enhancers that ensured every species could hear his words in their native frequency range. The third galactic census has been completed, he announced, his reptilian eyes scanning the thousands of delegates arranged in carefully ordered rows before him. The Draknari Empire now claims dominion over 47% of all habitable systems. Our military strength has increased by 32% since the last gathering. Our economic output surpasses the next 5 civilizations combined. A wave of respectful murmurs rippled through the front rows where the other major powers sat. The crystalline Vorthan collective chimed their approval in harmonious tones that sounded like wind through glass caverns. The insectoid hive queens of the Kitharan swarms clicked their mandibles in acknowledgement, their compound eyes reflecting the chamber's light like fractured rainbows. The energy beings known as the Stellar Communion flickered in patterns that conveyed both respect and wariness. From her position in the 7th row, Admiral Sarah Chun of the United Earth Defense Force watched the display with calm, analytical eyes. Her uniform, a simple dark blue fabric adorned only with rank insignia, seemed almost primitive compared to the ornate power armor and exotic biosuits surrounding her. The humans occupied exactly 47 seats in what most species considered the observer section. Close enough to participate in discussions, far enough back to be easily overlooked. This arrangement suited Chen perfectly. The Terran delegation maintains their traditional seating preference, I see, rumbled Vorthak, his gaze finding the human section with obvious amusement. Still content to watch from the shadows while their betters shape galactic policy. Several species in the front rows produced sounds that could charitably be called laughter. The Draknari had conquered 17 civilizations in the past century alone, each time announcing their intentions months in advance, arriving with overwhelming force, and crushing any resistance through sheer physical superiority. It was an approach that had worked flawlessly for over 3,000 years. Shin stood slowly, her movement casual and unhurried. Around her, the other human delegates remained seated, their expressions neutral. This, too, was tradition. One representative speaks for all, no dramatic gestures, no attempts to command attention through size or spectacle. Emperor Vorthak, she said, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber despite its conversational tone. The United Earth Defense Force congratulates the Draknari Empire on their continued expansion. We look forward to seeing how you adapt your strategies when circumstances require flexibility. The words hung in the air for a moment, polite enough to avoid offense, but carrying an undertone that made several of the more perceptive species shift uncomfortably. Vorthak's golden eyes narrowed slightly, but before he could respond, the chamber's emergency lighting system activated. Deep red illumination bathed the assembly as warning klaxons began to sound. The massive holographic display at the front of the chamber flickered to life, showing a real-time tactical overview of local space. What it revealed sent shocked gasps through even the most battle-hardened species present. A fleet was approaching. Not just any fleet. Ships unlike anything in the galactic databases, their hulls black as the void between stars, moving in formations that defied conventional tactical doctrine. The lead vessels alone were each the size of small moons, and behind them stretched an armada that seemed to have no end. Void hunters, whispered Hierarch Zenth of the Vorthan Collective, his crystalline form resonating with harmonics of pure terror. After 7,000 years, they have returned. The chamber erupted into chaos. Species that had been mortal enemies moments before now huddled together in primitive fear, their representatives calling out in dozens of languages simultaneously. The Void Hunters were legend, ancient enemies who had once swept across the galaxy like a plague, consuming entire civilizations and leaving nothing but empty space in their wake. Every spacefaring race had stories of the last war, when only the unprecedented unity of all galactic powers had barely managed to drive the hunters back into the dark between galaxies. "Order!" roared Vorthak, his enhanced voice cutting through the pandemonium. The Draknari Empire does not flee from shadows and stories. Whatever these invaders may be, they will break themselves against our might as countless others have done. But, even as he spoke, the tactical display updated with new information that made his words sound hollow. The approaching fleet numbered in the hundreds of thousands. Worse, preliminary scans suggested their technology had advanced significantly during their 7 millennia absence. Energy signatures that registered off the scale, hull materials that seemed to absorb scanning attempts, weapons systems that defied classification. Admiral Chun remained standing, her calm demeanor unchanged even as chaos swirled around her. She activated her personal communicator with a subtle gesture, speaking in low tones to someone not present in the chamber. "Confirmed," she said quietly. "Pattern recognition algorithms were correct. Begin Phase 1 protocols." The communication lasted less than 10 seconds, but several nearby delegates noticed it. Ambassador Kylix of the Heptarch Federation, a species known for their exceptional hearing, leaned forward with interest. The Heptarchs had always been curious about human communication methods. Their military was notoriously secretive, their technological capabilities difficult to assess, their true population numbers a subject of constant speculation. "Admiral Chun," Kylix called out, his translator rendering his whistling speech into standard galactic. "Does Earth possess intelligence regarding these void hunters that the rest of us lack?" The question cut through the noise of the chamber like a blade. Suddenly, thousands of eyes, sensors, and perceptual organs focused on the small human delegation. Chen turned to face the assembly, her expression thoughtful. "The United Earth Defense Force has been monitoring deep space anomalies for the past 18 months, she replied. "We detected gravitational disturbances consistent with large-scale movement in the void between galaxies. Our analysis suggested a 67% probability that the Void Hunters would return within the next 2 years. And you said nothing?" The question came from Warprime Krex of the Thanagarian battle clans, his 4 arms gesturing aggressively. "You allowed us to continue our petty territorial disputes while an existential threat approached." Chen's response was delivered with the same calm tone she might use to discuss supply requisitions. "The Galactic Council has repeatedly voted to exclude human participation from strategic planning committees. Our warnings regarding the Zephyrian Plague 12 years ago were dismissed as human paranoia. Our intelligence about the Stellar Rebellion was ignored until 3 systems had already fallen. Given this pattern, we determined that our resources would be better spent on preparation rather than persuasion." The uncomfortable silence that followed was broken by Emperor Vorthak's harsh laugh. "Preparation? What could your soft-skinned species possibly prepare that would matter against a force that required the combined might of the ancient galaxy to barely defeat?" For the first time since the crisis began, Admiral Chen smiled. It was not a particularly warm expression. "Your Majesty raises an excellent point," she said. "The historical records indicate that the last war required unprecedented cooperation, with every major species contributing their unique strengths to the collective defense. The Draknari provided raw military power. The Vorthans contributed their mastery of energy manipulation. The Kitharans offered their hive mind coordination abilities. Even the smallest civilizations played crucial roles. She paused, letting her gaze sweep across the chamber's hierarchical seating arrangement. Of course, that was before the galaxy stratified itself into rigid power rankings. Before cooperation was replaced by domination. Before the strongest species decided that sitting in the front row meant they no longer needed to listen to anyone behind them. The implications of her words sank in slowly. In the 7,000 years since the Void Hunters' defeat, galactic civilization had indeed changed dramatically. The ancient alliance of equals had been replaced by a pyramid of power, with the physically strongest species at the top, and everyone else arranged below them according to military might and territorial holdings. But the Void Hunters were returning with the same devastating capabilities that had once required total galactic unity to repel. "Where are your people going?" She turned back one final time, her expression genuinely sympathetic. "To the back row," she replied, "where we've always been most effective. You see, Your Excellencies, humans learned something during our brief time as an emerging species in this galaxy. We learned that the most dangerous hunters don't announce themselves. They don't claim the best territory or demand recognition of their strength. They watch. They wait. They study their prey until they understand every weakness, every habit, every predictable response. The tactical display chose that moment to update again. The Void Hunter fleet had accelerated, their estimated arrival time dropping from 6 days to less than 4. More concerning, the ships were beginning to separate into smaller task forces, each one heading toward a different major system. The hunters will arrive expecting to face the same galaxy they left 7,000 years ago. Chen continued as she walked backward toward the exit, her voice carrying clearly despite the growing distance. A galaxy where brute strength determined everything, where the strongest species would naturally form the front line of defense. They have had 7 millennia to develop countermeasures for that exact scenario. She paused at the chamber's threshold, silhouetted against the red emergency lighting. But they have never faced a galaxy where the apex predators learned to hunt from the shadows. Your Majesty, you wanted to know what humans have been preparing for the past 18 months? We've been studying the most successful military force in galactic history. Not the Draknari Empire. Not the Ancient Alliance. We've been studying the Void Hunters themselves. With that, she stepped through the exit, leaving behind a chamber full of the galaxy's most powerful species suddenly, feeling very exposed in their front row seats. In the silence that followed, the tactical display continued its relentless updates. The Void Hunter fleet grew larger with each scan, their formations more complex, their technology more advanced than even the most pessimistic projections had suggested. And for the first time in 3,000 years, the Draknari Empire began to understand that raw strength might not be enough. 3 days after Admiral Chin's departure from the Galactic Council, the first Void Hunter scouts made contact with outlying systems. The results were catastrophic in ways that defied conventional understanding of warfare. The Thanagarian battle clan outpost at Krex 7 was the first to fall. Warprime Krex had positioned his finest warriors there, veterans of 100 conflicts, wielding weapons capable of cracking planet cores, protected by shields that had never been breached. The battle lasted 17 minutes. When the Void Hunter ships departed, they left behind a system completely stripped of all organized matter. No debris, no wreckage, no evidence that anything had ever existed there except for the gravitational anomalies where planets had once orbited. Emperor Vorthak watched the tactical reports from his command throne aboard the Draknari flagship Eternal Dominion, a vessel so massive it housed its own industrial complexes and had never once retreated from battle. Around him, his greatest generals and admirals struggled to comprehend what they were seeing. "How is this possible?" demanded General Thyrak, his scarred scales bearing testament to centuries of warfare. "The Thanagarians are not weak. Their warriors have honor. Their weapons burn with stellar fire. How can an entire system simply vanish?" The holographic display showed a real-time feed from the Krex 7 system, or what remained of it. The star burned alone in empty space, its planets gone as if they had never existed. Worse, spectral analysis revealed that the missing matter hadn't been destroyed. It had been consumed, converted into something else entirely. Your Majesty, interrupted Communications Prime Vex, his voice tight with poorly concealed fear. We are receiving a transmission from the Vorthan Collective. Hierarch Zenth requests immediate conference. The crystalline form of Zenth materialized in the chamber through quantum entanglement projection, his usual perfect harmonics disrupted by stress fractures that made his voice sound like breaking glass. Emperor Vorthak, we must coordinate our response. The Void Hunters are not attacking randomly. They are executing a carefully planned strategy. Explain, growled Vorthak. They are targeting our strongest positions first, Zenth replied, his form flickering with agitation. Krek 7 was not just a Thanagarian outpost. It was their primary weapons testing facility. The hunters knew exactly what they would find there, and they neutralized it with surgical precision. Our analysis suggests they are systematically eliminating our most advanced military installations before we can adapt them for defense. The implications sent a chill through even the battle-hardened Draknari command staff. The Void Hunters weren't just returning with advanced technology. They had been watching, studying, learning about galactic military developments during their 7,000-year absence. What of Earth? Asked Vorthak, the question surprising everyone present. The humans claimed to be preparing for this eventuality. Zentha's crystalline form chimed with something that might have been bitter amusement. That is complicated. We have attempted to contact the United Earth Defense Force 17 times. Their responses have been polite, but uninformative. They claim to be implementing defensive protocols, but refuse to share specifics or coordinate with our forces. Typical human cowardice, spat General Thyrak. They hide behind their words while others bleed. But Admiral Kythex, the most veteran of Vorthak's commanders, raised a clawed hand thoughtfully. She was old even by Draknari standards, her scales bearing scars from the earliest expansion wars. My Emperor, if I may, the humans have never been cowards. Weak, yes. Technologically inferior, certainly. But they have participated in every major conflict of the past 3 centuries, always achieving objectives far beyond what their apparent capabilities should allow. You speak as if you respect them, Thyrak accused. Kythex's golden eyes glittered with something resembling amusement. I study effective predators, General. It is what has kept me alive for 700 years. And humans are very effective predators. They simply hunt differently than we do. Before anyone could respond, alarms began blaring throughout the ship. The tactical display updated with new intelligence that made everyone present freeze in shock. The main Void Hunter fleet had arrived. They emerged from the void between galaxies not with the dramatic fanfare of conquering armies, but like shadows made manifest. One moment, the deep space monitoring stations detected nothing. The next, a fleet numbering in the millions filled local space, their ships arranged in formations that seemed to follow mathematical principles beyond current galactic understanding. Mother of Stars, whispered Vex, his translator struggling with the religious profanity. How many ships are there? The computer systems worked frantically to provide an accurate count, but the numbers kept climbing. 3 million. 5 million. The scanners couldn't keep pace with the arrivals, and the fleet's formations were so complex that individual vessels kept disappearing behind others, making precise enumeration impossible. It doesn't matter how many there are, declared Vorthak, rising from his throne. They will face the combined might of the Draknari Empire and our allies. General Thyrak, signal all fleet commanders. We implement the Crushing Fist Protocol, maximum concentration of force, direct assault on their command vessels. Yes, my Emperor. Thyrak roared, his own battle lust finally, overcoming his confusion. But Admiral Kythex remained motionless, studying the tactical display with growing unease. My Emperor, she said quietly. Permission to point out a tactical concern? Vorthak's expression darkened at the implied criticism, but he valued Kythex's experience too much to dismiss her entirely. Speak. The Void Hunter formations, she said, manipulating the display to highlight specific patterns. They are not arranged for offensive action. This is a defensive posture, specifically a defensive posture designed to counter massed frontal assault. The observation sent murmurs through the command staff. Kythex continued her analysis, her claws tracing tactical movements on the holographic battlefield. Here, here, and here, she pointed out. These ship clusters are positioned to create overlapping fields of fire that would devastate any force attempting a direct approach. And these larger vessels at the rear, they are not command ships. They are siege platforms designed to engage fixed fortifications. Fixed fortifications like what? Asked Vorthak, though something in his voice suggested he already suspected the answer. Like planets, Kythex replied grimly. My Emperor, the Void Hunters are not preparing to fight our fleets. They are preparing to eliminate our home worlds while our forces exhaust themselves against their defensive screens. The horrible logic of it became clear to everyone present. The Draknari way of war, the way of war for most galactic civilizations, relied on the protection of heavily defended core worlds while fleets projected power outward. But if the enemy could neutralize those core worlds while avoiding fleet engagement, recommendations? Vorthak asked, his pride warring with pragmatism. Before Kythex could respond, a new voice cut through the command center's tension. It came from the ship's general communication system, broadcasting on an open channel that every vessel in the area would receive. Attention, all galactic defense forces. This is Admiral Chun of the United Earth Defense Force. We are implementing Operation Longhunt. All Allied vessels are advised to avoid direct engagement with Void Hunter formations until further notice. The audacity of it left the Draknari command staff speechless. A human admiral was issuing tactical directives to the galaxy's greatest military powers as if she had the authority to command them. Who does she think she is? Snarled Thyrak. We take orders from no one, least of all the weak-blood humans. But Vorthak was studying something else on the tactical display. Small anomalies in the sensor readings that had appeared moments after Chen's transmission. Ships were moving in the deep void, but they weren't appearing on normal scanners. Only gravitational distortion detectors were picking up faint signatures, and even those readings seemed deliberately designed to be barely detectable. Admiral Kythex, he said slowly, how many human ships were at the Galactic Council gathering? 47 diplomatic vessels, my Emperor. Nothing larger than a Corvette-class transport. And how many human worlds are there in total? Kythex consulted her databases. Official records indicate approximately 300 systems. Population estimates vary widely due to incomplete census data. Why do you? She stopped mid-sentence as the implications hit her. If the humans had been preparing for this threat for 18 months, and if they had been hiding their true capabilities as effectively as they had hidden their strategic warning. Computer, Vorthak commanded, display all current human fleet positions based on available intelligence. The tactical display updated to show the known positions of human vessels. According to galactic records, the entire United Earth Defense Force consisted of roughly 12,000 ships, mostly patrol craft and system defense platforms. A respectable force for a mid-tier civilization, but insignificant compared to the major powers. But as Vorthak stared at the display, a terrible suspicion began to form. Computer, analyze the gravitational anomalies detected in the past 6 minutes. Cross-reference with known human ship signatures. The analysis took several long seconds. When the results appeared, they revealed something that made every warrior in the command center reconsider everything they thought they knew about human military capabilities. The gravitational signatures were consistent with ships, lots of ships. Not the 12,000 vessels in official records, but something closer to 50,000. And they were positioned throughout local space in patterns that suggested they had been there for hours, possibly days, waiting in perfect silence while the galaxy's major powers prepared for conventional warfare. Mother of stars, breathed Kythex. They have been hunting us all along. Not the Void Hunters, us. They have been watching, learning, positioning themselves while we focused on displays of strength and territorial dominance. A new transmission from Admiral Chun interrupted her revelation. This time, the communication came through encrypted channels that somehow reached every major fleet simultaneously, despite the supposed impossibility of cracking Draknari, Vorthan, and Kitharan security protocols simultaneously. All forces, this is Admiral Chun. The Void Hunters have deployed in defensive formation Epsilon 7, consistent with projections from their historical tactical analysis. They are expecting us to respond with Pattern Alpha, direct assault on their command structures. Instead, we will implement Pattern Omega. Human forces will initiate harassment protocol in T-minus 30 minutes. All allied vessels maintain distance and observe. Learn how apex predators hunt when the prey thinks it's the predator. The transmission ended, leaving the most powerful military forces in the galaxy to contemplate the disturbing possibility that they had never actually been the apex predators at all. In the deep void around them, invisible ships began to move with the patience of creatures that had studied their prey for generations and were finally ready to feed. The first human attack came from a direction that defied three-dimensional thinking. Emperor Vorthak watched in stunned silence as his sensors detected weapons fire emerging from what appeared to be empty space. Not cloaked ships, but actual empty space. The projectiles materialized into reality milliseconds before impact, striking Void Hunter vessels with surgical precision that bypassed their defensive screens entirely. "How is this possible?" demanded General Thyrak, his scaled hands dancing across tactical controls in increasingly frantic patterns. "Nothing can fire from hyperspace. The energy requirements alone would. They're not firing from hyperspace." Admiral Kythex interrupted, her voice carrying the weight of someone solving a puzzle she'd been working on for decades. "They're firing through folded space. Look at the weapon trajectories. They originate from positions that correlate with gravitational anomalies we detected hours ago." The tactical display updated to show the impossible geometry of the human attack. Ships positioned light minutes away were somehow delivering weapons fire through artificially created spatial distortions, allowing them to strike targets from multiple angles simultaneously while remaining safely beyond retaliation range. But what disturbed Vorthak more than the technology itself was the tactical doctrine it revealed. The humans weren't trying to destroy the Void Hunter fleet. They were studying it. Each attack targeted a different type of vessel, probing its defenses, analyzing its responses, cataloging its capabilities. When the Void Hunters adapted their shield frequencies to block the strange spatial weapons, the humans immediately shifted to different attack vectors. When the enemy tried to trace the attacks back to their origin points, they found nothing but empty space and gravitational echoes. "Admiral Chun, to all galactic forces," came the now familiar voice across communication channels. "Phase 1 complete. We have confirmed Void Hunter defensive capabilities match projections from 7,000-year-old tactical data. They have not adapted their fundamental strategic doctrine." Proceeding to Phase 2. What followed challenged every assumption the galaxy's major powers held about warfare itself. Human ships began appearing throughout the battlefield, but not in the way anyone expected. Instead of uncloaking or dropping stealth fields, they seemed to unfold from reality itself, emerging from spatial distortions that suggested they had been hiding not just from sensors, but from three-dimensional space entirely. "Dimensional warfare," whispered Hierarch Zenth, his crystalline form resonating with harmonics of pure awe. He had joined the conference after his own fleet's sensors detected the impossible human maneuvers. "They have weaponized higher-dimensional mathematics. This is technology that surpasses even the first civilization archives." The human vessels themselves were unlike anything in galactic databases. They possessed clean, angular lines that seemed to shift and blur when observed directly, as if the ships existed partially in normal space and partially somewhere else. Their hulls bore no obvious weapons, no traditional propulsion systems, no recognizable defensive equipment. Yet they moved with fluid grace that suggested complete mastery of local spacetime. Their formations, observed Admiral Kythex, her tactical mind struggling to comprehend what she was seeing. "They're not fighting in 3 dimensions. They're fighting in, how many dimensions are they using?" The answer came from an unexpected source. Dr. Yelthin, the Vorthan Collective's greatest mathematician, had been analyzing the human attack patterns with increasing fascination. "Based on trajectory analysis and spatial distortion measurements," he announced, his harmonics carrying mathematical certainty, "the human forces are operating in at least 7 spatial dimensions simultaneously. Their ships can exist and maneuver in hyperspatial regions that we cannot even perceive, much less defend against." Emperor Vorthak felt something he had not experienced in over 3 centuries of warfare: genuine uncertainty. The Draknari Empire had conquered dozens of civilizations through superior force and tactical doctrine. They understood strength, they understood intimidation, they understood the projection of power through overwhelming violence. But they did not understand predators that hunted from dimensions beyond perception. Admiral Chun, Vorthak transmitted directly, his pride wrestling with pragmatism. The Draknari Empire requests tactical coordination. What are your intentions regarding the Void Hunter fleet? The response came after a pause that suggested careful consideration. Emperor Vorthak, with respect, that is not the correct question. The Void Hunter fleet is not our primary objective. It never has been. Then, what is? Demanded the Emperor. The same thing it was 7,000 years ago, Chun replied. We are hunting the Void Hunters themselves. The ships, the technology, the fleets, those are just tools. We need to understand the intelligence that wields those tools, learn its patterns, discover its weaknesses. The Ancient Alliance won the last war by driving the hunters away, but they never eliminated the fundamental threat. We intend to correct that oversight. The implication sent shock waves through every species monitoring the transmission. The humans weren't planning to repel the Void Hunters. They were planning to hunt them to extinction. That's impossible, protested Warprime Krex, his forearms gesturing frantically from his refugee command ship. The Void Hunters are not a species. They are a force of nature. They consume matter itself. They exist in the spaces between galaxies. How do you hunt something that has no physical form, no home world, no central command structure? Admiral Chin's response carried the patient tone of someone explaining a complex concept to a child. Warprime Krex, you are thinking like prey. Predators think differently. We ask different questions. Instead of how do we fight this enemy, we ask, what does this enemy need to survive? Instead of how do we stop their attacks, we ask, why do they attack in the first place? She paused, and, when she continued, her voice carried the weight of absolute certainty. The Void Hunters have been absent from this galaxy for 7,000 years. But they have been watching, studying, analyzing. They needed that time to adapt to the changes in galactic civilization. This suggests they are not the immortal force of nature you believe them to be. They are biological entities with finite lifespans, finite resources, and finite capabilities. On the tactical display, human forces were implementing maneuvers that defied conventional understanding. Ships appeared to be occupying the same space as Void Hunter vessels without collision, phasing in and out of normal reality to deliver attacks that bypassed all known defensive systems. But, more importantly, they were capturing data with every engagement. Moreover, Chun continued, they chose to return now, when galactic civilization is fragmented by hierarchical power structures rather than united by common purpose. This suggests strategic thinking. They are exploiting our social weaknesses, not just our military ones. But strategic thinking means predictable behavior patterns. And predictable behavior patterns mean vulnerabilities, completed Admiral Kythex, her respect for human tactical thinking growing with each revelation. You are not fighting them. You are studying them like specimens. Exactly. Every attack they make reveals information about their decision-making processes. Every defensive maneuver shows us their technological limitations. Every formation change demonstrates their command structure. We have been doing this for 7,000 years, Admiral Kythex, learning how to hunt hunters. The battle around them was becoming increasingly surreal. Void Hunter ships that had seemed invincible were being systematically dissected by human forces that appeared and disappeared like ghosts. But, instead of destroying their enemies outright, the humans were conducting what could only be described as battlefield surgery, removing specific components, analyzing capture samples, mapping internal systems. Phase 3 initiation, announced Admiral Chun. All galactic forces, prepare to observe dimensional hunting techniques. What you are about to see has never been attempted on this scale. What followed challenged the fundamental laws of physics as most species understood them. Human ships began to overlap with Void Hunter vessels not through collision, but through dimensional phase shifting. They existed in the same spatial coordinates while occupying different dimensional frequencies, allowing them to move through enemy hulls like ghosts through walls. But, unlike ghosts, they could selectively interact with specific components, disabling weapons systems from the inside, extracting crew members through dimensional portals, mapping internal structures in real time. "This is not warfare," breathed Hierarch Zenth, his crystalline form trembling with harmonics of awe. "This is dissection. They are taking apart the Void Hunters piece by piece to understand how they function." Emperor Vorthak was beginning to understand why humans preferred the back row. From their perspective, every other species in the galaxy had been performing for their benefit, demonstrating capabilities, revealing weaknesses, showing predictable behavioral patterns. The galaxy's hierarchical power structure hadn't been a natural evolution of stronger species dominating weaker ones. It had been a carefully maintained ecosystem where the true apex predators could study their subjects without being detected. "Admiral Chun," he transmitted, his voice carrying new respect despite his efforts to maintain imperial dignity. "How long have humans been capable of dimensional warfare?" "Emperor Vorthak, that is also not the correct question," came the reply. "The correct question is, how long have humans been preparing for the Void Hunter's return?" The answer came not from words, but from the revelation that unfolded across the battlefield as more human ships revealed themselves. Not dozens or hundreds, but thousands, tens of thousands. Ships that had been positioned throughout local space for what could only have been months or years, waiting in dimensional hiding for this exact moment. But more disturbing than the numbers was the technology. These were not the primitive vessels other species had observed in previous conflicts. These were weapons platforms that incorporated captured and reverse-engineered technology from every major galactic civilization, combined with innovations that suggested centuries of dedicated research and development. "The answer is always," Chen continued, her voice carrying the weight of species-wide purpose. "Humans have been preparing for the Void Hunter's return since the day we first learned of their existence. Every war we have participated in, every alliance we have formed, every technology we have encountered, all of it has been in service of this single objective. You have been using us," accused Warprime Krex. "Using our conflicts to test your theories, our technologies to enhance your capabilities." "Yes," Chen replied without hesitation or apology. "In the same way that you have been using smaller species to test your weapons, enhance your territories, and validate your power. The difference is that we have always been hunting something that threatened the entire galaxy, while you have been hunting each other." Around them, the systematic dissection of the Void Hunter fleet continued with surgical precision. But Emperor Vorthak was beginning to realize that the real revelation was not human military capability, it was human strategic thinking. They had turned the entire galaxy into their hunting ground, using every species, every conflict, every technological advancement as tools to prepare for a threat that would have destroyed all of them. And they had done it from the back row, where predators belonged. The moment everything changed came when the Void Hunters tried to retreat. Emperor Vorthak watched through his flagship's advanced sensors as the enemy fleet began implementing withdrawal protocols, dimensional gates opening in the spaces between realities, ships preparing to fade back into the cosmic void where they had hidden for 7 millennia. It was a tactical retreat any sensible commander would recognize, a strategic repositioning to avoid further losses while reassessing the threat. The humans did not allow it. "All galactic forces, observe closely," came Admiral Chen's voice across every communication channel. "What you are about to witness is the difference between driving away a threat and eliminating it permanently." What followed challenged every assumption about the nature of space, time, and dimensional physics that galactic civilization had developed over millions of years. As Void Hunter ships began their retreat into higher dimensional space, human vessels didn't pursue them, they anticipated them. Ships appeared at the coordinates where the enemy would emerge from their dimensional shifts, having somehow calculated the exact points in space-time that the fleeing vessels would occupy. More impossibly, they had arrived at those coordinates before the Void Hunters had even begun their retreat maneuvers. "Temporal warfare," whispered Dr. Yelthin, his crystalline form resonating with harmonics of mathematical terror. "They are fighting through time itself. They know where their enemies will be because they have already observed them being there." Admiral Kythex studied the tactical display with growing comprehension and horror. The human attack patterns weren't just sophisticated, they were causal paradoxes. Ships were responding to events that hadn't happened yet, positioning themselves to counter maneuvers that were still being planned by enemy commanders. Admiral Chun, she transmitted, her voice carefully controlled. Are you fighting this battle from multiple temporal reference points simultaneously? Admiral Kythex, you are beginning to ask the right questions, came the response. Time is simply another dimension to be exploited tactically. The Void Hunters believe they can escape through dimensional phase shifts because they think in terms of three-dimensional space and linear time. But predators learn to think like their prey thinks their predators cannot think. The philosophical implications of that statement were staggering, but its practical applications were even more disturbing. Human forces were not just fighting in 7 spatial dimensions. They were fighting across multiple temporal vectors, turning the entire battlefield into a 4-dimensional hunting ground where escape was not just impossible, but had already been prevented before it was attempted. This is madness, protested Warprime Krex from his refugee vessel. Time travel violates fundamental physical laws. Even the first civilization never achieved temporal manipulation. Warprime, you are correct that this violates the physical laws as your species understand them. Admiral Chun replied with what sounded like genuine sympathy. But your species has been thinking about physics like prey animals, assuming that the universe operates according to rules that protect you from being hunted too effectively. A new voice joined the conversation, one that sent shock waves through every species present. It came from the Void Hunter fleet itself, transmitted through communication methods that bypassed all known technology, and spoke directly to the minds of those who heard it. The voice was not electronic or organic. It was something else entirely, a form of communication that existed in conceptual space rather than acoustic reality. It spoke in harmonics of pure meaning that every species understood regardless of their sensory mechanisms or translation protocols. The humans are not what they appear to be. The transmission carried undertones of something that could only be described as fear, a concept that the galaxy's most ancient and terrible enemy should not have been capable of experiencing. They are like us, but different, evolved, along different vectors. We consume matter. They consume understanding. We traverse dimensions. They traverse possibilities. Emperor Vorthak felt his battle-hardened mind struggling to process the implications. The Void Hunters, legendary beings that had once consumed entire galaxies, were describing humans in terms that suggested they represented an even more advanced form of cosmic predator. The galaxy believes, we are the ancient enemy. We are not. We are fleeing, always fleeing. The humans are what we flee from. The revelation sent shock waves through the assembled fleets. Every species present had built their understanding of galactic history around the Void Hunters as ultimate antagonists, ancient enemies who represented the greatest threat to organized civilization. But the entities themselves were claiming to be refugees from humanity. Admiral Chin's response came after a pause that suggested careful consideration. The Void Hunter Collective speaks truth within their understanding, she said finally. They are indeed fleeing, but not from humans specifically, from what humans represent. We are not the first species to develop dimensional hunting capabilities. We are simply the first to apply them systematically over geological timescales. New ships began appearing around the battlefield, not human vessels, but something else entirely. They emerged from dimensional space with signatures that matched no known technology, their hulls bearing design aesthetics that seemed to shift between familiar and utterly alien depending on the angle of observation. Allow me to introduce our associates, Admiral Chun continued. The galaxy believes humans represent a single species, a single technological development pathway. This belief has been convenient for our purposes. The new vessels were crewed by beings that appeared human at first glance, but revealed subtle differences under closer examination. Variations in bone structure, organ placement, neural development, all within the range of what could be considered human, but clearly representing distinct evolutionary branches. Humans are not one species, Chen explained with the matter-of-fact tone she might use to discuss weather patterns. We are dozens, hundreds. We represent the end result of every possible human evolutionary pathway that developed dimensional hunting capabilities. Some evolved in high-gravity environments. others in low-gravity space stations. Some developed in time streams that moved faster than baseline reality, others in temporal regions where millennia passed like minutes. The implications were staggering. The galaxy had been interacting with what they assumed was a single mid-tier civilization, never realizing they were facing a collective of alternate human species that had been coordinating across dimensional and temporal boundaries for thousands of years. Each human variant has contributed unique capabilities to our collective hunting strategy, Shin continued. The temporal variants mapped Void Hunter movement patterns across multiple timelines. The dimensional variants developed phase space manipulation technology. The high-gravity variants created matter compression techniques. The spaceborne variants mastered zero-point energy manipulation. Emperor Vorthak was beginning to understand the true scope of human preparation. They had not spent the past 18 months preparing for the Void Hunter's return. They had spent the past 7,000 years developing the capabilities to hunt them across every possible dimension, timeline, and reality variant where they might exist. The collective requests. Negotiation. Came the Void Hunter transmission, its harmonics now carrying clear overtones of desperation. We offer withdrawal to deep void, permanent exile, from galactic regions, no return, for 1,000 millennia. Negative, Admiral Chun replied without hesitation. The Void Hunter Collective has demonstrated consistent behavioral patterns across multiple galactic cycles. You consume civilizations, retreat when faced with unified resistance, then return when resistance factors have diminished. This pattern has repeated 17 times across various dimensional frequencies. It ends now. What followed was not warfare in any sense that galactic civilization understood. Human forces, revealed now as a multidimensional collective spanning dozens of species variants and thousands of years of technological development, began implementing what could only be described as existential hunting. They did not simply attack Void Hunter ships or disable their technology. They began systematically erasing the enemy's ability to exist in any dimensional frequency, any temporal vector, any possible reality where they might pose a future threat. Ships were not destroyed, but rather edited out of existence, their matter and energy converted into forms that could not support Void Hunter consciousness. This is genocide, protested Hierarch Zenth, his crystalline form resonating with harmonics of moral distress. You are eliminating an entire species. Hierarch Zenth, you are thinking like prey again, Admiral Chun replied with infinite patience. Predator species do not commit genocide. They eliminate competing predators that threaten their hunting grounds. The Void Hunters are not a species in the sense you understand. They are a metaparasitic collective that exists by consuming the organized complexity of other civilizations. They cannot be negotiated with, reformed, or contained because their fundamental nature requires the destruction of everything that is not them. The systematic elimination continued with mechanical precision. But what disturbed the galactic observers more than the methods was the scope. Human forces were not just eliminating the Void Hunters from local space. They were tracking them across dimensional boundaries, temporal vectors, and parallel realities, ensuring that no variant of the threat could escape to threaten any possible version of galactic civilization. How long have you been planning this? Asked Admiral Kythex, her voice carrying new respect and considerable apprehension. Since we first learned that life was possible, Chun replied. Every human civilization that has ever existed has contributed to this moment. We have been breeding for intelligence, developing technology, exploring possibilities, building capabilities, all in preparation for the day when we would need to eliminate the greatest threat to organized existence in the universe. And after this threat is eliminated? Emperor Vorthak asked, though something in his voice suggested he feared the answer. Admiral Chin's response carried the same calm certainty that had characterized all her communications. After this, Emperor Vorthak, humans will return to the back row. We prefer to observe rather than dominate, to study rather than control. But the galaxy will understand something it has never understood before. The difference between strength and power is that strength announces itself, while power only reveals itself when necessary. Around them, The last of the Void Hunter Collective was being systematically erased from existence across all possible dimensions and timelines. But the galaxy's major powers were beginning to realize that the real revelation was not the elimination of an ancient enemy. It was the understanding of what had been watching them from the back row all along. 6 months after the last Void Hunter was eliminated from existence across all dimensional frequencies, the Galactic Council convened again in the same obsidian chamber where everything had begun. But the carefully maintained hierarchy of seating arrangements had fundamentally changed. The front rows, once occupied exclusively by the galaxy's strongest military powers, now held a mixture of species representatives. Draknari commanders sat beside Vorthan theorists, who collaborated with Kitharan hive minds and Thanagarian strategists. The rigid power structure that had dominated galactic politics for millennia had given way to something resembling actual cooperation. The human delegation occupied the same seats they had always preferred, row 37, center section, where they could observe everything while drawing minimal attention to themselves. Admiral Chen sat in her usual position, reviewing reports on a tablet that looked remarkably ordinary compared to the exotic technologies surrounding her. Emperor Vorthak approached the human section with an expression that would have been unthinkable before the Void Hunter crisis. Genuine respect mixed with carefully controlled apprehension. His massive frame cast shadows across the smaller human representatives, but his body language conveyed deference rather than intimidation. "Admiral Chun," he said, his enhanced voice modulated to conversational tones rather than imperial pronouncement. "The Draknari Empire requests a private conference regarding galactic security arrangements." Chun looked up from her tablet with the same calm attention she might give to any routine administrative matter. "Emperor Vorthak, such discussions are typically conducted through diplomatic channels. Is there a specific concern that requires immediate attention?" "There is," Vorthak replied, gesturing toward the transformed chamber around them. "The galaxy has changed fundamentally since the Void Hunter elimination. Traditional power structures no longer apply when some species possess capabilities that transcend conventional understanding of physics and time. The Empire seeks guidance regarding humanity's intentions for galactic governance." The question drew attention from delegates throughout the chamber. Other species had been wondering the same thing. If humans possessed such overwhelming technological and strategic superiority, why were they not claiming dominion over galactic civilization? Why return to observer status instead of seizing control? Chen set down her tablet and stood, her movements carrying the same unhurried precision that had characterized her actions during the crisis. "Emperor Vorthak, you are asking the wrong question again. You assume that superior capability implies desire for control. This assumption reveals predatory thinking, but not apex predatory thinking." She gestured toward the mixed seating arrangements that had emerged naturally as species began collaborating more effectively. Apex predators understand that healthy ecosystems require diversity. Monocultures are vulnerable to systematic collapse because they lack the adaptive flexibility that comes from multiple approaches to problem solving. "But you could dominate if you chose to," pressed Warprime Krex from his nearby seat. "Your dimensional capabilities alone make conventional resistance impossible. What prevents you from imposing your will upon the galaxy?" Admiral Chen's response carried the patient tone of someone explaining a concept to children. "Warprime Krex, you are thinking like a mid-tier predator. Mid-tier predators compete for resources because they view existence as a zero-sum game where one entity's gain requires another's loss. Apex predators understand that intelligence is not a finite resource. It is something that grows when shared and diminishes when hoarded." She paused, letting her gaze sweep across the chamber's new cooperative arrangements. Humans benefit more from a galaxy filled with diverse, intelligent civilizations pursuing their own optimal development paths than from a galaxy of subordinate colonies mimicking human approaches. Innovation emerges from the intersection of different perspectives. Problem-solving improves when multiple cognitive frameworks attack the same challenges. Exploration advances when various species pursue different technological pathways. Hierarch Zentha's crystalline form resonated with harmonics of philosophical interest. "Admiral Chun, are you suggesting that human non-interference is itself a form of predatory strategy?" That you maintain galactic diversity because it serves human interests? Hierarch Zenth, you are beginning to ask better questions, Chen acknowledged. But you are still trapped in predator versus prey thinking. Consider instead the concept of symbiotic hunting. The term was unfamiliar to most species present, and Chen took a moment to explain. On Earth, certain predator species form cooperative relationships with other hunters, not pack behavior where identical individuals coordinate, but true symbiosis where different species contribute complementary capabilities. Humans represent this approach scaled to galactic proportions. She activated a holographic display that showed complex ecological networks rather than traditional military hierarchies. Draknari excellence in direct combat provides security for research environments where Vorthan mathematical capabilities can flourish. Vorthan theoretical advances enable technologies that Kithran hive minds can implement with unprecedented coordination. Kithran implementations create stable platforms where Thanagarian warrior philosophers can explore strategic innovations. Each species pursuing its optimal development creates capabilities that benefit the entire galactic ecosystem. The model was elegant in its simplicity, but its implications were staggering. Rather than competing for dominance, species could specialize in their areas of greatest natural strength while benefiting from the specialized achievements of others. It was cooperation elevated to the level of evolutionary strategy. And humans? Asked Admiral Kythex. What is humanity's specialization in this symbiotic model? Chen's smile carried the same calm confidence that had characterized her throughout the crisis. Humans specialize in meta-analysis. We study how different forms of intelligence interact, how various approaches to problem-solving can be optimally combined, how to identify and eliminate threats that endanger the entire ecosystem before they become unsolvable. Threats like the Void Hunters, observed Emperor Vorthak. Threats like rigid hierarchical thinking that prevents adaptive cooperation, Chen corrected gently. The Void Hunters were only dangerous because galactic civilization had stratified itself into competing power blocks that couldn't effectively coordinate responses to existential threats. If the galaxy had maintained the cooperative frameworks that defeated them 7,000 years ago, their return would have been a manageable challenge rather than a near-extinction event. The observation sent uncomfortable ripples through the assembled delegates. Every species present had participated in the hierarchical competition that had made the galaxy vulnerable to systematic exploitation by entities that understood how to turn competitive instincts against themselves. So you allowed us to compete, to establish dominance hierarchies, to fragment ourselves into rival power blocks, said Warprime Krex, his forearms gesturing with growing comprehension. You observed our behavioral patterns, studied our weaknesses, prepared countermeasures for the threats that would inevitably emerge from our short-sighted competition. Warprime Krex, you are still thinking in terms of manipulation rather than ecosystem management, Chen replied. Humans did not allow anything. We observed natural processes and prepared responses to their predictable consequences. Every species in this chamber chose their own developmental pathways. We simply ensured that your collective choices would not result in total civilizational collapse when those choices proved inadequate for addressing existential challenges. Dr. Yelthin's mathematical mind was working through the implications with increasing fascination. Admiral Chun, how many other existential threats has humanity identified and prepared countermeasures for? The question hung in the chamber's atmosphere like a physical presence. Chen consulted her tablet briefly before responding. Currently active preparation protocols number in the thousands. Most address relatively minor threats, cosmic phenomena, resource depletion scenarios, technological development pathways that could lead to civilizational suicide. 17 protocols address major extinction-level threats comparable to the Void Hunters. The casual tone in which she delivered this information made it even more unsettling. Humanity was simultaneously monitoring and preparing responses to thousands of potential threats while maintaining the appearance of a minor galactic power primarily concerned with peaceful observation. And if we choose not to participate in your symbiotic ecosystem model? Asked Emperor Vorthak, though his tone suggested the question was more philosophical than challenging. Emperor Vorthak, that choice has always been available, Chun replied. Apex predators do not force cooperation. They simply ensure that the consequences of non-cooperation are clearly understood. Species that choose competitive isolation over symbiotic development tend to encounter difficulties that cooperative species avoid. These difficulties are natural consequences of their choices, not punishments imposed by external forces. The subtle implications of that statement were clear to everyone present. Humanity would not force galactic cooperation, but they had demonstrated the capability to eliminate threats that emerged from the lack of cooperation. Species could choose isolation if they preferred, but they would face the consequences of that choice without assistance when those consequences proved unmanageable. So we are free to return to our previous hierarchical arrangements, observed Hierarch Zenth. But if we do so, and if that choice generates existential threats, humanity will respond to protect the galactic ecosystem as a whole rather than preserving individual civilizations that have chosen self-destructive pathways. Hierarch Zenth understands correctly, Chen confirmed. The chamber fell silent as delegates contemplated this new reality. They were not subordinate to human authority, but they existed within a galactic ecosystem where humanity served as apex predators with the capability and inclination to eliminate threats to the system's overall health, including threats generated by the other species themselves. It was freedom, but freedom within carefully maintained boundaries that ensured collective survival. Emperor Vorthak was the first to break the silence. Admiral Chun, the Draknari Empire formally requests participation in humanity's symbiotic development protocols. We offer our military capabilities in exchange for guidance regarding optimal specialization within the galactic ecosystem. The United Earth Defense Force accepts Emperor Vorthak's proposal. Chen replied with the same matter-of-fact tone she used for all official business. Draknari excellence in direct combat applications will be invaluable for protecting research installations and exploration missions throughout frontier regions. One by one, other species began making similar requests. Not submission to human authority, but voluntary participation in a cooperative framework that promised better outcomes than endless competition for hierarchical dominance. As the session concluded and delegates began filing out of the chamber, Admiral Chun returned to her tablet and began reviewing reports for the next day's agenda. Around her, the other human representatives maintained their quiet efficiency, processing information and making subtle adjustments to plans that spanned multiple galactic regions and extended centuries into the future. From the front rows, Admiral Kythex watched the human delegation with newfound understanding. They had returned to their preferred seats in the back, where apex predators belonged, close enough to observe everything, far enough away to avoid interfering with natural processes, positioned perfectly to respond when intervention became necessary. The galaxy's strongest race had indeed learned why humans preferred the back row. It was not a position of weakness or submission. It was the optimal hunting ground for species that specialized in protecting entire ecosystems from threats that individual civilizations could never handle alone. And, from that position, they would continue watching, planning, and preparing for whatever challenges emerged from the vast darkness between the stars.